Hey everybody, I thought I'd show you just something I've been working on the side lately, which is the Microsoft Teams tab for Octopus Deploy. There's a few people who have asked for integration with Microsoft Teams. So there's a connector that somebody's already done and put into the library, but an actual Microsoft Teams tab people said would be useful as well. So the library one will basically just push a message to Microsoft Teams using a general webhook, and it gives instructions for doing that. There's also a blog post associated with this that shows people how to do it. But I didn't think that was enough. So what I've done is created a Microsoft Teams tab basically here as well. So all of the code is in octopus.ms teams, octopus-ms teams. It's private at the moment, but the intention is to make that public as soon as it's a little bit more stable. There's a couple of things we're working out, including, of course, some better documentation, but it gives you some information about building the tab if you want to build it internally as well. There's basically these two commands, gulp build and gulp manifest. The whole thing's written in TypeScript as well. So it means that there's a couple of things you can do. Gulp build will compile everything and give you basically the resources that need to live on Azure, and I'll show you that in a sec. And then there's also gulp manifest. And ultimately all that does is package up the manifest file. The files themselves are pretty straightforward. There's the TypeScript, the static content, and then a manifest file, which just has information about the ID, where to find the icons, and which page to actually show during configuration and display as well. So I'll show you this up and running. So first thing you need to do in Teams is go to View Team, and then there's a Bots section as well. Now in Microsoft Teams, if you have your own one, you'll need to enable sideloading of bots, and you can do that via the admin for your Microsoft Teams account. It's a little bit annoying, a few clicks to get there, but eventually you can. And then it gives you this option to sideload a bot or tab. So that's where the manifest comes in, and that's just a zip of that manifest file. So I can open that up, and once it works out what I've uploaded, it'll give me give me the name of a bot that gives you permissions that it needs and so on as well. Once you've done that, that tab will be available to add to any of the channels in that team. So you can see all the ones that are built in and a few third parties like Hootsuite and so on. But we've got this Octopus Deploy one now. We have to agree to the license terms and privacy statement as well. These are actually empty at the moment, so that's another thing we'll have to work on. But once we accept that, we get a configuration page. Now, just an interesting point on this, the extension that you give to Microsoft Teams, Microsoft won't host any of that information itself. So this page is actually just a static page in Azure, and I've just put them on octopusteams.azurewebsites.net. I don't really see any harm doing that. I mean, this never really gets exposed to the end user anyway. But if we wanted to put that in a domain, that'd be fine. But this static HTML page ends up here, and so does the actual ultimate page that we load. So let me just, I've got an ngrok of my own, and I'll talk about why in a sec. And then an API key, wrong thing in the clipboard. There we go. And once we exit out of that, it'll make a request to the Octopus server and get all the projects. So we're just going to load the Hello World one, and you can see there's some styling issues which I need to work out. But it is a work in progress, and just so I don't get spammed, I'll undo that. So once I save that, it should give me the information, basically the dashboard of that project from Octopus. And again, we can go and change the settings and change to a different project, for example, and get those details as well. So there's a few things happening here. This page, again, is just delivered. This is in an iframe. So the request to the Octopus API actually occurs from the browser. But from the browser, and the source is this Octopus Teams AzureWebsites.net Teams tab page. What that means is in your Octopus server, you need to allow access with a CORS header from that location to your Octopus server. So there's an extra step that you need to do to enable that access. So that's a little bit of a pain, but there's not really any way around that. There's also a couple of little hacks that are in the JavaScript behind the scenes. When you change these settings, there's no way to actually store these settings on the server natively. We can't say, here's the data that's associated with this tab. The only thing that you can save is an ID or an entity ID for this tab that we're configuring. That's just a string though, and so to save this data, I just serialized it into JSON and stored that as the entity ID. Now that's really hacky, but the alternative is hitting this URL here, Octopus tab or whatever it is, with a query string, which would give us each customer's Octopus URL and API key, and we don't want that information, frankly. So I thought it was better just to do this hacky version and save that information there. But the result is ultimately the same. You get this this nice UI here. Clicking on any of these will open up the Octopus server right onto the deployment itself. So you can see that task. And then there's also a link to open the website, which will open the Octopus server itself. So there's a few deep links in here as well. And this will refresh every 10 seconds just to make sure that it's up to date. So that's basically the extension. I'll just jump back really quickly. Oops. There's a couple of limitations with this, obviously. The first thing is that you have to add the cause header. And this is easy for us to document, but I would anticipate if we release this, we'll get a handful of questions about how to actually get it to access my server and so on. The access itself should be fine if you're working from a browser that has access to that Octopus server. So unlike the VSTS extensions, there's no request being made from Microsoft servers. It's all coming from your browser because it's all done in JavaScript. But you do need to say the source of that JavaScript request is fine to come from octopusteams.azure websites. The other one is the styling issues. It turns out that you can reference the Teams CSS, so the style sheets that are used with Microsoft Teams, but there's fonts inside that style sheet which can't be accessed from your extension. So you get a bunch of errors in the console of your browser when you run that. So I'm in the process of basically reproducing all of the styles that Microsoft Teams has, which hopefully won't backfire, but we'll see what happens there. And then finally, Microsoft needs to be able to test this. So the last thing that I wanted to do was add that cause header for our for our demo.octopusdeploy.com. And then the API key, you can always use the guest API key, which means that they can't write any data with that anyway. But that should be an easy way to test it. So there you go. That's all I had.
Next up is me. I wanted to talk quickly about certificate step template parameters. Not so much to show the feature, but just to talk about a couple of the things that came out of it, I guess, and things to think about for the future. So certificates, when we shipped it, it had a flaw with using certificates as parameters into step templates. It was effectively impossible to use. So we've remedied that. So now you can imagine if you add a step template and you want to base it on a script, you can go and add a parameter to it and make it of type certificate. And in the step, this will let you then do something like access the expanded properties of that variable. Something like that. And this is nice, I think, because it will let you do things like if you wanted to go and update IAS bindings based on a new certificate, if you wanted to set the certificate as the Azure SSL certificate, it opens up quite a lot of things you can do. And then you can also imagine that being able to use these things. So this is actually sort of where we get to a few of the interesting design things. So it's obviously useful to be able to access these from the script console. So imagine you'd written a script, to go and update IAS bindings to replace your old certificate with the new certificate. We want to come in and say, select all the machines I want to run this across. Whoops, sorry. Need to learn how to use Octopus. Step templates, grab our echo cert, whichever one doesn't matter, and go run. And then select the certificate that you want that to be done with. Ooh. So you notice there you select an actual instance of a certificate. Hopefully I wrote that template correctly. You can trust me, that works. On the flip side, when you add that step template into a project, it's not so useful to select an actual instance of a certificate. What you're actually selecting is a certificate variable to bind to. So if we look at using that in here, when it displays up as a step template, that's not the same step, sorry. You'll see that this selector here is not an actual certificate. Instead, it's a drop down of the certificate variables that you have available in that project. So what you're saying is I want to bind to certificate X variable, which will bind to a real certificate appropriate for the environment that the step's being run in, which is a useful concept, I think, but we probably in the future maybe want to implement that in a slightly different way with better support for that. So rather than it appearing differently on either usage, maybe we have a better selector for these type of variables where you can select either an instance or a variable to bind to, combining the concepts. The other issue that implementing this raised was we've got a number of situations now where we reference from snapshots out to entities that aren't snapshotted. So to do this, I grab out into the step template at the time that the deployment is created. So obviously, if that step template is no longer there, that causes a problem. The same issue currently exists with accounts. It also currently exists with certificates, although the certificate archive functionality was designed to handle that. So I guess I just wanted to start the very initial ball rolling on a conversation about whether we want to create a generic way to snapshot things so that there'll be a permanent reference to them, so that a deployment process or a variable set can reference something that's guaranteed to be there. And the final thing that I wanted to mention was when I started playing around with using this and thinking about the ways that you would want to use a step template that uses a certificate variable, the first thing I wanted to be able to do was to go and run the import certificate step. And I realized that you can't do that at the moment for two reasons. One, running from a script console, you can only run scripts. You can't run other steps. That's not such a hard thing to work around. But then I realized that it's not actually a step template you want to create off that, because you want all the variables available. There's none that I wanted to set in the template. I want to be able to choose the certificate. I want to be able to choose the store that I'm importing it into. So it would almost be nice to have the concept of a way to run steps outside of a deployment process, almost have a process that wasn't part of a release or as part of a project, because that would open up the option to integrate a lot more. So if you had something like OPSI stuff, exactly. And the idea that we talked about for renewal policies for certificates, again, the concept of that would be choosing steps to run. And I think that the idea of that applies to other areas of Octopus as well. There's times when it'd be useful to be able to select a list of things to do, like as part of retention policies, health checks, anywhere that weren't, basically steps that aren't in a deployment process though.
Sorry, would that be possibly something that the composite step templates, because at the moment you can run a single step template through the console, but then if we have composite step templates, which itself is kind of like a deployment process to an extent, but it's kind of a standalone, do you think that would kind of go a good part of the way to getting what you're after there? Or?
That's interesting. Maybe. I hadn't thought about it, but we would have to, there's a few things.
You can supply the value.
Yeah, so you would supply the values that you need at the time. Yeah, possibly. Almost like a process.
And then we could escalate the script console up to a little bit more of a usable first class type mechanism.
Yeah.
Because I know people want to get a little bit more permissions and control around it. Obviously, like these sort of cases you're talking about are probably handy as well.
Yep. So yeah, those were the three things I sort of wanted to call out and mention as things to think about for the future. But overall, you now use them as parameters into scripts and run them from the console and create templates around the import certificate step and use them in a project. You just can't run them from the script console. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, script console.